Relationships Unfiltered. I want to talk about some information that is kind of interesting relative to the dating game out there. And so I decided to do some research into what are people generally looking for. And I looked at profiles from various different sites, dating sites and apps and all that stuff. Some of the more popular ones that many of you know about, such as Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, amongst others. And I was just sort of diving into both men and women in terms of what they're looking for out there. And I kind of like put it into age brackets as well too. And one of the interesting things that comes out of it is the gap between what men are looking for just in terms of age range versus women. Now, like I said, I put it into the age brackets. So I put it from 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, and then 60 and over. And so I'll start with the women first. And with the women, particularly for women in their 20s, let's kind of go from that age group first, 20s up to 30, they generally like to stay with guys who are probably somewhere from 25 to 35. That's kind of like what I was seeing from a lot of the women in their 20s, more or less. And so the medium age was about 26 of women that I was looking at. And so that kind of fits for them, 25 to 35. So within their age group and older. There were, of course, some who like men, a little younger than them, but most of them from that age group were looking for men either right at their age or older. Now going into women in their 30s, and I'll get to some other factors as well in this as well too. Women in their 30s tended to, and again, kind of going with the median age now, 35 with that, still slightly younger, a couple years, irrespective of what age it is in that group, whether they're 30, if they're 30, they're going like 28 or 27, somewhere around there, to pushing it a little older, 7 years or so. So if they're 30, they're going up to about 37 or so. If they're 35, maybe it's about 40 in that sense. And then they're going down to about as young as 30 and so. And then later 30s tended to go a little bit, again, stretching it down a little bit younger by about 34 or so to slightly older, 40, 42, somewhere around there. And then when I got to the women in their 40s, still hovering close in their age range, a little younger, about 37, 36, up to 45 or so in the 40s. And then later 40s, still a lot of those women still feel like they can get a younger guy somewhere around 42 or so. But most of them kind of stay within their age range. And then those who went slightly older, late 40 women, probably around 53 or so. Then going into women in their 50s, still most of those women, like men, generally in their same age bracket. Again, close, a couple years younger, a couple years older. So 2 to 3 years younger, 2 to 3 years older. So they're more closely aligned. Women in their 50s, more closely looking for men, more closely aligned to their age in general. There were some who, of course, would go a little bit lower, or a lot lower, some in their 50s still trying to think they're going to get like a 38, 39-year-old man. Again, these are just a couple out of what I picked. As far as the number of, I try to get 100 from each side because I looked at a lot of different sites. So I kind of took like 10, randomly 10 from like 6 different sites of people and try to number crunch that and looking at some of that data that I put together with that. So that was women in the 50s, and then go to women in their 60s, and they're right at men, at their age or slightly older, okay, for those types of women. Now, going to men. And across the board with men, most of the men look at women who are younger. So, and significantly. So I want to kind of go around with there. Men who are in their 20s, they're just looking all over the place for the most part. But again, mostly younger. But again, if they're mid 20s, again, they're looking like 21, 20, 21, even 18, upwards to 30. Okay. Men in their 30s still looking at the young ones from 25, 24 at the lowest or the floor level, and then up the ceiling level, late 30s or so. Not too many in the 30s are going for women in their 40s. And if they are going in their 40s, they're going early 40s, like 41, 42, somewhere in that going back, under 45 for sure. And then men in their 40s, like the other men, still hovering down in with younger women, 30-ish for the most part. There were a few guys who were kind of getting into their 20s, 27, 28, even saw a guy 25 and that type of thing. But most of which the sweet spot for those guys are, again, early to mid 30s. These are men in their 40s. Then moving to men in their 50s, still younger and much younger in some cases. But for them, again, most of those women from low 40s to mid 40s, some right around their age, but not too many would go higher than their age for men in their 50s. And then, of course, men in their 60s, still men would look for women mid to late 40s upwards to mid 50s on average. So what does that tell you? A lot of what it told me is that the men's obviously are seeking women much younger to much younger. So that's one. The range with men, that window is larger as well. So whether it be average, I would say average 7 years younger to right close to their age. So there is not a lot of men who are looking at women much older than them. And if they are looking older, it's only by a year or 2 or 3, under 5 for sure. So, but the thing is, the men age range is a lot larger than it is with women, particularly men in their 40s and men in their 50s and so forth. Now, another factors that I want to talk about with this includes, and there's one site which I really like, they allow where the profiles would say they're right there on appearances and all that kind of stuff, which I like. So that was one I really found interesting too. So they had average, good looking, above average, good looking, stunning, and you decide. Those are the choices that I saw the most of. Now, for the women, as you might guess, most of the women chose themselves as good looking to stunning. So that was sort of like the average. Good looking was number one. Then above good looking, stunning, average, less than, and then you decide. So most of them were somewhere in that range. The top one was good looking. So, of course, women generally will look at themselves as good looking. If they want to have the appearance that they're good looking, if they're putting their profile that they're average, then that's not a good sign. And that's not going to get a lot of wins. That's not going to pull a lot of guys to your profile in most cases. Now, for the men, most of the men would have either average as well. And then you decide as the second choices of the profiles that I looked at, then good looking, okay, for their choices of how they're viewing themselves in that category. So men tended to either put themselves at about average, or you decide, which generally would say that they still showing a confidence in themselves, but not trying to judge themselves down or judge themselves too high. And it seemed with women that they obviously want to project themselves either in a more positive, good looking to better than good looking image of themselves. So that's what you get out of that. And I found this quite interesting when I looked at this data and trying to assess it from the standpoint of people out there in the dating spaces and what are they actually looking for, and talking to people. When you ask them in person how do they view themselves, again, the same thing is true. Just like asking people what is their class, in terms of social class, social economics, most of them would say that they're middle class. And a lot of that is measured by, their living lifestyle more so than their actual net worth and value in their bank account and all that kind of stuff. So it's largely based upon perception and the way people view themselves. But here is the kicker that comes with regarding to perceptions, because is that matched up to your dating value. Now, when I did my survey talking to people about the dating space and everything that's going on with regard to the whole thing with looks and all that, again, people would say, well, yeah, looks matter, but I really like a person's personality and all that stuff. And I'm like, well, how are you going to get know the personality if you're judging by looks? Because that's the first impression that you have with people. So there was this sort of dichotomy in that when you're talking to folks about these things, these character traits that they want to put out there. Because again, when I talk to people in the profiles and people in person about what is it you look for with a person, and they list all these things, these attributes, these qualities, these characteristics, and so forth. But much of this is based upon first impression looks. And so that's a real thing as relating to people's choices, people's preferences when it comes to dating, that women tend to play down when it's as important as it is with men. Men are much more transparent and upfront about looks with their partner. I'm talking about when choosing a partner, looking for a nice looking, good looking partner. As with women, they tend to play down looks and select these other qualities with the respect that we know that women still like a man based upon looks, okay? And that sort of goes into what I was seeing with this data, in that a lot of these women are going with the younger. When I analyze these profiles with these people, with these women, so let's say they went 7 years younger, but they only went maybe 2 to 3, 5 years older, okay? So the pendulum relative to younger versus older seemed to go larger with women. When women's choices, they tend to go larger younger than they go older, which in most people's minds, they would think that the woman would go, if that by that gap, they would go older than they would go younger. Now, here's the other part to this. Well, let me start with the women in 30s. Let me go to the women in 30s. So the women in their 30s who's looking, let's say she's 35. The guy who's 35 is looking for a woman who's late 20s to younger 30s. So the woman who's 35, based on that data, he's not looking for the 35-year-old. I mean, not saying he wouldn't date or be interested in a 35-year-old, but there's be some factors. She has to look younger, okay, to be a 35. If she's 35, she got to look like she's 30 or 28 or something like that, okay? So that man who's in his 30s is not necessarily looking for a woman who's of his same age, okay, in her 30s as he is in his 30s, mid-30s we're talking about, okay? Because either way it goes, he's always looking first for the younger woman before a woman his age in those cases. Now also, again, for the woman in her 40s now, she's looking for a man similar in age or slightly younger. So she's, again, we're going with the medium of 45, and then she's looking at for a man who's 42. She is going to be a second or third choice for him. A man in his 40s is not looking for a woman in his 40s or in her 40s. He's looking for a woman who is in her 30s first, mid to late 30s, then early 40s. So again, slightly younger than him, up to the age where they are the same age. If it, again, and taken at 45 being the medium. Then of course, men in their 50s, the same thing. Younger woman. So again, early 40s. A man in his 50s, early 40s to mid 40s, and third or fourth would be a woman in their early to mid 50s. So these women who are looking for men in a similar age demographic on these sites are finding it harder to meet men of same age in their preferred age groups that they're looking for, because most of the men are generally looking for women younger. This is not rocket science for people here, especially people who are experiencing these things. And I want to hear from you. What are your experiences like? Do the data that I'm just presenting to you, does that match up to your own experiences within that? It certainly matches up to my experiences and so forth. Most of the women that I have dated and been in relationships with have been younger, in some cases significantly younger. So, and that continues to be generally the norm of the men that I know as well too. matches up to that. So those are things to sort of consider and think about out there, but how do you leverage yourself to find someone who fits to what you're looking for? That's the summary of all of it at the end of the day. I think what happens is because of these sort of components that stick out in these apps and these dating sites and so forth, people make these hard decisions just based upon the hard numbers or looks, which is a hard category. And then they don't take in account of just trying to meet someone who might, let's say, for example, again, if a woman has 35, she's 45, but she has a hard cutoff of 40 on her cutoff point. But what if she does meet a man who's like 37, who's slightly younger than her, or even 35? So, but that's not put in there, you see, for that flexibility. It's not put in her profile, for her, because a lot of women, they're very emphatic about those age barriers. They say, oh, I'm not looking for no guy who's, they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s. They say, I'm not looking for no guy in their 20s, because they still see those guys as immature. They're at home with mama. They're not independent, not responsible. I'm just telling you from what I see on the women and what they're saying themselves. Okay, I'm not trying to put my own agenda in there. I'm telling about what I'm seeing and what I'm finding. Okay, my findings. Now, the men, that's why I think with the men, they tend to go with that larger age range. So then it gives them more flexibility in meeting a woman outside of a woman who's older, though. Again, so they only are going a few years older. The men in their 30s, slightly older, depending on the age. If he's 32, he's 35. So again, it's always still a couple years older, with the larger years being the younger. And that's consistent of what I find. And I've looked at a lot of different sites, and I've tried to evaluate based off the contacts, the information first, with what I've been able to find just viewing profiles and trying to take that data. Second, behind that, outreaching to people and explain what I'm doing and how I'm trying to just get some understanding, in their preferences and how that all fits. And then third, just speaking to people in person, asking them general questions about these sort of things and what their experiences have been. And so again, this is what is going on. So it's some interesting information, certainly, and data that just sort of puts a picture at where you have to understand where you are, again, in the dating in the marketplace, in either your success or your lack of success, or the success that you're not getting that you think you should be getting, because these are factors in how other people are looking, because most people, they aren't necessarily able to compare themselves in what are the hot commodities out there. And this is one of my questions for folks. If you were our dating stock, where would you evaluate yourself at? Would you evaluate yourself as a buy, as a hold, or as a sell? Let me know in the comment section and reach out to me because I'm going to have some follow-up on this one soon enough, as you know, here at Relationships Unfiltered. Thank you for tuning in and listening, and we will get back to you next time with more on Relationship Unfiltered. Thank you very much.